Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on the release of LeaseControl version 1.8.0. My name is Lucy Oborn. I'm the LeaseControl manager here at Maxwell Geoservices and we're very pleased to be releasing these enhancements. You will note that in your GoToWebinar sidebar you have a section called Questions where you can enter any questions or comments you have throughout the presentation and we will go through these at the end. As you know, the resources sector is constantly growing and changing. It's underpinned by shifts in policy and politics. Managing compliance throughout these changes is integral to retention of title, which in turn is integral to company survival. As you're no doubt aware, title compliance has relevance to all business sectors, requiring an integrated system for streamlined data control and reporting. This version 1.8.0 has focused predominantly on supporting comprehensive and efficient stakeholder reporting, expanding on the solution's global application, and capturing broader financial compliance data. In addition, of paramount importance, we're reducing the stress of the user's day-to-day operations. The new and improved features were built over the last 6 months following consultation with users and drawing on the industry experience of our management team. Today we're focusing on training users on the critical enhancements to workflows. We'll be covering the new locality hierarchy and groups within your configuration settings, the public holiday configuration to support business day functionality, and the new action builder, which has simplified a lot of the action configuration, particularly considering the enhancements that were required. We also have new critical date fields for both leases and agreements. And we now have the availability to expand on the multiple groups per lease so that you can have multiple groups. And we're also expanding the expenditure facility so that you can override those calculation provisions in a much more simplified manner. And to accommodate all of those changes and help with your user independency, we have made a significant enhancement to the help manual. We're going to start with the restructured locality hierarchy and the introduction of configuration groups. Being able to configure the different classes of titles and agreements independently of others is a key feature of the LeaseControl system. Building on this, to enhance your experience, we've implemented better intuition. First, you can configure your actions and public holidays, which we'll speak about shortly, in any of the objects within the hierarchy. The benefit being these configurations and any changes that you make to them will automatically be added to any child object. For example, if I configure an action in Argentina, it's added to the 2 children, but not to any other object. If I configure an action in the root directory, being the location tree, it will flow onto every object. If I configure an action in exploration license, on the other hand, it won't be added anywhere else as there are no children. This concept of children and parents are reiterated and illustrated within the release notes and the help manual if you require further explanation. Otherwise, please contact us. Secondly, where previously the localities were controlled through a separate library, you now control them directly within the configuration screen. Simply right-click on the hierarchy and select New. Now just quickly while we're here, a little side note. The new location for nominating the tax that applies to rent has been located, seeing as you are losing that library. Back to controlling localities. Selecting New opens up a window for specifying details. Parent is where you indicate its position within the hierarchy. Africa, for example, was created with a parent of the root directory location tree. Incidentally, this is the same window that you'll use to create new lease and agreement types, maintaining consistency for users. You will note that this window has a field named Type, which brings us to our third point, Groups. We wanted to provide you the means of organising your view without adding to your drop-down menus within the leases and agreements, and you can do this via groups. Groups are indicated by a little filing symbol. They will not appear in drop-down menus in the lease and agreement records. For example, you can select Wyoming as a locality for a lease or agreement, but not USA. If I wanted to make USA available for selection as a locality within the lease or agreement record, I would simply change it from a group to a locality. You edit these objects by simply right-clicking on the object you wish to edit and selecting Edit. Same screen, maintains consistency throughout. Now, although locality is not part of the agreement configuration hierarchy, agreements still use the same system for agreement type additions and edits and for creating and editing groups, so you haven't lost any of those facilities as you move to the other module. That should give you a solid understanding of the hierarchy, which is a good grounding to now discuss the public holiday configuration. I'm first going to show you how to configure them, and then we'll be looking at how we put those into action when we move on to the action builder. So firstly, why are we tracking public holidays? We're aware that mineral titles have been lost in the past or otherwise jeopardised as a result of public holidays not being accounted for. Every region has different public holidays and some public service leave holidays, meaning you may be open for business but a particular government department isn't. Particularly when you're operating across borders, this can be a nightmare and a huge risk to your company, particularly if your main person isn't available and the person relieving them isn't aware of these. Therefore, we are very pleased to provide you with the ability to configure public holidays. As we mentioned briefly in the previous topic, these can be configured at a parent level, which will cause them to be added to the children. This is why some of the configurations you see now are highlighted in green. This is how you distinguish those that were added via the parent. They can't be edited here. You have to edit them within the parent locality, which in this case is Australia. And you'll see that we have entered the locality into that description to make it easier for users. You should be familiar with this type of grid. New data is entered into the first row and added into the grid by pressing Enter on your keyboard. Before we go any further, a very important fact to know. Public holidays that would otherwise fall on a non-business day, a weekend or existing public holiday, will carry forward to the next business day, and this is really critical to understand. By way of example, let's say this is your calendar, which means you have some weekend days. These are automatically considered non-business days, no action required on your part. Then let's say this was December, and therefore the 25th and 26th were Christmas and Boxing Day respectively, both of them in this instance being public holidays. First, let's look at Christmas Day and say that's the 25th. It's not a business day. Therefore, we need to carry it across to the next business day. And hello, Monday the 27th, you're now a non-business day. Then LeaseControl looks at Boxing Day and finds the same thing. It's not a business day. Therefore, it finds the next day that is, which in this case is the 28th, and makes that the non-business day. So now that you're aware of the important information, what configuration options do you have? You have several, which are all quite straightforward, and we'll go through these one at a time. First, where the day and month is consistent from year to year, you simply enter the date in the day, month field as shown. Second, where the date changes from year to year, some of these are configured by simply adding the relevant year so it won't occur on other years. And this is done via rules, which is our third option. Of course, these may be entered within different objects within the hierarchy, as we mentioned earlier. Perhaps Christmas Day, being the most common, is entered as at a route level, while the mark equinox is country specific, either as a locality or a group, of course, depending how you set them up, or it may be specific to a domestic region. You can also configure per lease type to assist in managing the public service holidays. Remember, they will carry over to children objects, but not to any others. But then there is always an exception to the rule, so you have filters. Either your usual filter option, where you double-click the cell, or you can limit the dates to which it applies within the grid. This last option can be useful if management of titles are moving from one office to another and you want to ensure that the public holidays of the managing office apply to all titles. Now you're going to ask, well, that's great, but how is it useful? What about the compliance actions that fall on the public holidays? For this, we use the new action builder, which we will run through now. Now, I just want to be really clear. If you want to change the date of your actions because of these non-business days, you must do this. We do not impose it automatically. It's something that you need to select on a per action basis. Configuring your compliance actions has never been easier. We're going to walk through these one step at a time. First is the top section, which is called Action Data. There's nothing new here to what you had in version 1.7.3. We've just laid it out differently. Applies to is automatically generated. We'll show you how to get to it in a minute, but for now, understand that at time of opening, you've already selected an object in the hierarchy, either the root directory, a locality, a group, or a lease or agreement type. We'll show you how in a minute. Action priority is where you select required or irregular. And yes, this is a new name, as the previous name caused confusion for users. If you require assistance with which option is appropriate, click the manual has a new section called Action Management under the chapter Customising Lease Control to help you. The action type is the same as the current version, noting that you can filter the actions browser by specific action types for ease of viewing and reporting. After all, the views are far more relevant when they're specific to your task at hand. Description is the same as the current version. It's how you identify what this compliance action requires you to do or be aware of. Policy description is your Mining Act description. We have renamed it to ensure all users understand that it relates not only to government policy, but your company's internal policy as well. For example, a lot of people say it doesn't matter what the legal requirement is for that renewal, you must lodge it a week earlier. Then you have the first occurrence section. In version 1.7.3, your occurrence would contribute to the calculation of the first occurrence. However, this caused users to have to manually adjust some actions, so we have taken that out. First, you tell LeaseControl how to calculate the first occurrence, noting that you can add multiple steps to calculate your compliance date. Simply use the plus button on the right of each row to add a new row. Then you nominate the day from which you are calculating, which you'll remember from version 1.7.3. So all in all, this is quite straightforward. Earlier we were talking about public holidays and non-business days. These come in here, and we'll now run through a demonstration of that functionality. Consider a renewal application for a title. The last thing you want is that being overlooked, and it's critical to easily identify the absolute last day possible, which I usually refer to as the drop-dead date. And yes, you have your own company policies that use earlier dates, but we all know life happens. You take on new titles, you change your mind about wanting to retain the title, and in some instances you have to raise the money that accompanies the application or someone in the team may have made an error. Let's say our title expires on the 25th of March 2019 and the legislation says the renewal application must be lodged 3 months prior to expiry of title. And you know that in this particular region, if it falls on a non-business day, you have to lodge the business day prior. No worries. First, we know we're calculating from the expiry date. Then we want to count 3 months backwards. Now this is where we get a little bit smart to account for the business days. Calculate 1 business day forward, remembering of course that the Boxing Day public holiday is in there on the Wednesday. Then 1 business day backwards. And voila! Now I know you're going to ask whether or not this works if there were only business days, so no adjustment needed to the due date. So let's test this out. First, we go back 3 months, then forward 1 business day, then back 1 business day. And ta-da, we still arrive at the correct due date. So test this out for yourself when you upgrade and just see how you go. We've also expanded your calculate from actions, which I would like to run through now. You will note the new specify year tick box. Put simply, if your action is relevant from the expiry date, you can simply select expiry. That's the same as before, so no problems. However, in some regions, the anniversary date for things such as reporting are a combination of the expiry and grant dates, just by way of example. Specifically, the very first reporting period is from the date of grant to the anniversary of expiry. Thereafter, from the close of the last reporting period to the anniversary of expiry. In version 1.7.3, you had an option called expiry day, month. In version 1.8.0, this is converted to selecting expiry as the primary driver and then overriding the year by ticking specify year. Then selecting the relevant year, which in this case is grant. Now your first occurrence is based on the close of the first reporting period. The same rule applies when the action is based not on the lease's unique critical dates, but rather a set calendar date across the board. You simply select custom and enter the day, month. In this case, we've used the 30th of June. If you left it like this, LeaseControl would look for the next valid year. And as of today, that would be 2017. In most instances, this is what you want. However, you can also specify a year as the first occurrence, such as may apply to implementation of new policy. Next is your repetition, remembering this is how you instruct LeaseControl whether or not to automatically generate the next occurrence at completion. Either enter how often the actions of this configuration are to occur, or alternatively, tell LeaseControl you don't want it to automatically generate by ticking occurs once only. Now this is where there is a slight difference from version 1.7.3. While ticking occurs once only will stop the next action from automatically generating, it won't stop it being created in the future by triggers. For example, you don't always want a variation or exemption of expenditure conditions with every expenditure reports lodged. Therefore, you may opt to tick these as occurs once only, noting that in version 1.8.0, this will not inhibit generation of this action as a part of the expenditure workflow when it is required. The section called Upon Completion means exactly that. What other action do you want LeaseControl to take when you mark this action complete? Completion processes refer to the compulsory collection of data when marking an action complete. You should be familiar with these from version 1.7.3. However, of course, the help manual does provide additional information for you. Follow-on actions, on the other hand. You will be familiar with this from version 1.7.3 in that you can cause other actions to generate when this one is completed. For example, you might want a monitoring action after you lodge a renewal application. If you complete the first field only, it will operate the same as version 1.7.3. It will generate every irregular action that matches the action type that you nominated. Remember, action type is what you nominated at the top of the action builder. What's new is the ability to specify a specific configuration, which may be irregular or required through use of this second field. If you use this second field, only this one action will generate, specifically the one matching the action description that you nominated. Remember, the action description is what you enter at the top of the action builder. Lastly, you have your filters. The primary filter is a quick fix configuration based on critical dates and also includes the action date. This is a great way to limit application based on changes in legislation, for example. In version 1.7.3, these fields were a part of your grid on the far right-hand side. The secondary filter is accessed by clicking the filter button. There's an X if no filter has been applied through this means and a tick if there is a filter within it. This you will be familiar with from version 1.7.3. At the bottom of the action builder are buttons that you will be familiar with. Apply to save changes, OK to save and close, and cancel to close without saving changes. New closes without saving changes and generates a blank action builder to start a new configuration. A couple of important things to note. First, please refer to the release notes for how your current configurations were carried across. This is very important as comparing your actions and action generations on a copy of your current database will assist you in ensuring that you are comfortable with these transitions. We conducted the transitions so that the actions would have exactly the same functionality as it did prior, give or take any enhancements such as the occurs once only. It's critical that everyone is confident with the new features prior to implementation, which is true of any software upgrade. However, given these are compliance actions, you need to put additional stress points on this. Additionally, for reporting group actions, you now have the option of trading in the bulk completion of actions for alternate completion processes such as the expenditure workflow. Lastly, business days. While applying the leases and group actions do not currently apply to agreements given governance is not straightforward. We want more information from you on this as to how you want to use this feature and the potential impacts against your agreements in order to develop this feature further. For such purpose, our email and phone number will be at the end of this webinar. Now, if you don't mind excusing me for just one moment, I just need to grab another glass of water and I'll be back very, very shortly. Sorry about that, everyone. I'm back. Where was I up to? Okay. Now, I promised that we would revisit how this applies to field is generated based on how you open the action builder. You can create a new configuration from the lease or agreement configuration screen by right-clicking on the relevant object and selecting Create New Action, noting that your selected object will appear in the Applies To. So click Canada if you want to create the action configuration at this level, or Exploration License if you would prefer to create it here. Alternatively, in the Action tab of the Lease and Agreement configurations, as well as the Group Action screen, you have a button. Using this, as with the previous method, opens a new configuration. Lastly, you can double-click on the existing action configuration to view or edit it. That completes our training on the Action Builder. Please note there is comprehensive instruction within the new help manual under the section Customising Lease Control. We're now going to look at another critical function that is enhancing data capture and stakeholder reporting, the new customisable critical date fields. The last of these enhancements are comparatively quick to run through as there is less change to current protocol. You can now add new critical date fields in both leases and agreements, in addition to editing existing fields and reordering the fields. To do so, from the Settings menu, select System Functions. This will generate the System Admin window, remembering that of course this section is password protected. From here you select Edit Date Settings. Simply either select Lease or Agreements from the drop-down menu, and the grid will populate with the settings for that module. In this way, you're able to control each module individually. The grid acts like most other grids in LeaseControl. To add a new date field, simply enter the particulars into the top row, press Enter on your keyboard, and it moves into the grid and saves changes. To edit an existing row, simply edit the particulars within the grid and press Enter on your keyboard to save changes. Some suggestions on how these fields can be used. Recording the date your renewal application expires. For example, in some regions, the renewal application carries the title in force beyond expiry, stopping it from lapsing. However, a renewal application in some instances can only carry the title in force for the period applied for. Now, there is a case within Australia where a title was lost because reapplication wasn't made. So this is just as critical as your expiry date at times. Some stock exchange reports and board reports require details of what interests have changed. Therefore, recording acquisition and divestments can be used to build a query in Query Builder or a customised report in the Report Designer in order to arrive at a changes of interest report. In a lot of regions, an area is subject to moratorium on further applications over that same land. You may therefore want to record a pending application in LeaseControl until the land becomes available, at which time you can change the lease ID to the resultant title identification. It may be worth noting also at this point that moratorium can also apply to the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, so you may want to record when you have the ability to go back and negotiate for grant of your application. Additionally, some titles have further dates relating to application. For example, when it was pegged, sometimes referred to as marking out, the date the application was approved but not granted, for example, pending grant of another title, or perhaps the date it was registered by the government as being acceptable. And yes, you can most certainly configure actions based on this date, just as you can with existing critical dates. Now for some user efficiencies. Throughout various regions, there is the requirement to submit reports in respect of multiple titles, which may be relating to exploration, production, environment, or other legislative requirements. Now this is great, except that the grouping generally differs between each purpose. Therefore, I'm going to introduce to you now the very simple system of nominating multiple groups per title. You can now allocate a lease to multiple groups using the new Group Reporting tab, which is found under the Legal tab. Now, just to let you know, there will be further enhancements to both the Group Reporting and other legal tabs in upcoming releases. However, we want your feedback on this as to how it's been used within your region or regions to ensure that additional fields and functions are compliant with your requirements and are best practice. Currently, we're aware that leases can belong to groups for the purposes of various reasons, including CSR. Therefore, as in version 1.7.3, you can configure multiple actions per group that can then be generated against this lease. Now you have an understanding of the straightforward group reporting enhancements, remembering, of course, that using the Action Builder for configuring group actions has provided many benefits as detailed earlier. Next, in response to the global application of LeaseControl, you have always been able to nominate forward expenditure commitments independently of configurations. However, we have improved the process to facilitate better reconciliation and reporting of forward years. Currently, you configure a title's minimum expenditure commitment based on a calculation set by the government, which populates the commitment field of each title record and provides a checks and balances upon completing expenditure actions. This calculation can be overridden on a case-by-case basis where your commitment could not be calculated. For example, an adjustment due to an area change or agreement between the holder and government, or simply the calculations do not apply in your region. Now, using the pre-existing Financial Expenditure tab, you can enter forward commitments that cannot be calculated that will override the configuration and contributes to the checks and balances when completing expenditure actions. This also improves reporting of forward commitments using Query Builder or the Report Designer tool. To use this feature, enter the forward commitments for as many years as required. In some regions, it's 5 or more years, but in others, it's just a one exception to the rule. Remembering to leave the expenditure lodged blank, thus allowing the expenditure completion process to recognise the next occurring report period. Now, for those of you that manage petroleum titles, yes, these years can overlap. To determine the next reporting period, LeaseControl first looks for the earliest date to value. Then, if there are multiple, the earliest date from, and if there are still multiple, it will look for the earliest entered. We have covered a lot of detail, which is summarised in the release notes. However, to improve user experience and your independency, we have expanded our help manual content, which of course addresses the changes made within version 1.8.0. You may wish to refer to the section Where Do I Start?, which provides information for both new and existing users. There is also an I Want To section, which provides useful links to various sections within the manual depending on what it is that you want to do. Throughout the help manual, there are hints, notes, warnings and additional support references, troubleshooting and much more to improve your independent learning skills and access more efficient functionality. We also have workflows as images to assist with your learning skills. That covers the critical components of version 1.8.0 that required some sufficient training support. The remaining enhancements, while in high demand, follow existing processes and therefore I refer you to the release notes for further information that you may require. Thank you very much for everyone's interest in this version 1.8.0 upgrade. We would appreciate user feedback to ensure we maintain a high standard of service and implementation. If you would like to provide this feedback or you have queries or questions for additional training or mentoring, I welcome you to contact one of our global officers.